Good morning. We are learning the Mitvzah Rebbe's Maimer, which is the source foundational text of the end of Hemshech Ayin Beis, which is our primary focus, trying to understand what the conclusion of Ayin Beis would have looked like had the Rebbe Rashab continued writing. So both gives us background, context, but also answering questions that the Rebbe Rashab had posed. And as we continue on, the plot does thicken and clearly emerging. I hope you're picking it up as well, but I'm trying to convey as much as I can. Obviously, as we get deeper into it, I'll connect all the dots. So meanwhile, where we are right now is trying to understand that in addition to Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom, the flame of God, which is the soul of man, we also have the Ner Mitzvah, the flame, the candle of God, the candle of the mitzvah. I've been explaining at length from the bottom of page, really going from page 390, and now we're on page 401. So basically 11 pages so far. There's going to be another 2 pages of this till 402. Discussing Ner Mitzvah. What is the meaning of that? Briefly, a mitzvah is divine will. That the God didn't just create a world, He also gave us His actual will, what He wants of this world. And that's called a mitzvah. All the mitzvahs comprise that the will of Hashem, the will of God, as expressed in each mitzvah in its own way. So when we do a mitzvah, we're drawing down from the highest levels what He calls kedushas ha'atzmos. Because God said, I'm sanctifying you. Asher kedushanu b'mitzvahs v'tzivanu. You've sanctified us. The one who sanctified. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam. Blessed is God, who sanctified us with His mitzvahs. So He gave us life, created a world, put us in this world, and gave us mitzvahs to sanctify us. So in addition to what the Neshama achieves, like we've learned, and Neshama it's also is a holy, sacred Neshama, the mitzvahs add a whole new level of sanctity that comes from the highest levels of the divine. So even as the soul comes down below, where it manifests into this physical world, and it's concealed, like we learned. So we have this, in our repertoire, we have the tool, in our tool chest, we have the instruments called mitzvahs that give us that power. And it's mamshich the makif elyon, a makif, a very transcendent, and it's kedushanu, the highest levels of kedusha, and it's drawing it down all the way into this world, while also helping elevate, and it has the power to elevate the animal soul and the divine soul to levels that the divine soul could not have reached on its own. In the exam, so why is it called Ner Mitzvah? Because that's what a mitzvah is. Ner is a candle. It's a keli. A mitzvah is a keli. The mitzvah doesn't just draw down the earth, it also creates the container. Both the person who's doing the mitzvah as well as the very mitzvah itself is a container of physical objects, whether it's the wool of tzitzis or the parchment of tefillin. And the same with all the other mitzvahs. He mentioned a whole bunch of examples. It takes the physical world and turns it into what? A keli, a container, fuel, shemen. So it's the shemen, the oil, that becomes consumed, that fuels the divine fire, the flame. That's what a mitzvah is. And the wick is the nefesh halikiz, the neshama that's doing the mitzvah. Because the mitzvah itself, like he said, there's 2 things. There's the mitzvah itself, that's the oil. And there's the person that does it is the wick, because without that person, the mitzvah is not being performed. As much as there's holiness in tefillin, but the mitzvah of tefillin is only performed when a person actually puts on tefillin, like we learned in yesterday's class. And that's what the wick is about. The psila, that's machaber, the wick that draws and absorbs the oil that's dissolved in it and turns into the flame, the fire, the light of the So there you have a mitzvah, basically a combination of physical objects in this world, the oil, with a soul be serving as a wick, that draws that oil, and then that oil in turn fuels the divine will, or the divine purpose of life, which is the divine fire that this mitzvah creates. And in the process, the shemen actually adds, like he said, a mitzvah shnasa b'kavonim b'dvarim gashmim shekol v'nichel be'er ter godel gam b'nefesh halikis. This causes that the nefesh halikis, the wick, should have a lot more fire and light than it would have on its own as the oil adds to it. And the more the oil, the more the flame that comes. And it's lo yachser v'lo yifse ka'er. V'shem al reishcha, the oil on your head, like he said, al reishcha, it's above the mitzvahs that are above, that are like makif above on the reish. And these mitzvahs which are performed by the person, I should also add, and the kavanah of the mitzvahs. He also added the kavanah, not just the mitzvah itself, also its intention, all done by the person. And there you have. So Ner Mitzvah captures exactly what a mitzvah is in its fullest sense, that very mitzvah itself, and also the performance of the mitzvah that creates the fire, the light, fueled by the shemen, by the oil. Okay. And to connect it to Ayin Beis, this part in Ayin Beis, he asked the question, what is Ner Mitzvah? And what are the three things in the mitzvah? The wick, the oil, and the light. But he never answered that question. He answered it briefly on page 1352. But when he asked it again on 1466, he never answered the question. Because the Ayin Beis ended much earlier, in the sense where Ayin Beis ended more about where the yichur of Shema and the two yichudim as they come together are what the divine soul teaches the animal soul. Even that we didn't learn about how it affects the animal soul. Even Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam was not finished completely. Definitely not this piece of Ner Mitzvah. But here we see where the story with the narrative continues in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. So whatever we're learning here, you could pretty much rest assured that the Rebbe Rashab would have said this because he asked the question for sure. So very likely he would have answered. Not very likely, he definitely would have. So what we're learning now is in a way could be seen as a supplement to help us conclude Ayin Beis. But there's a lot more to go. Torah, and then we have to go back to Torah and Teriah and to the central themes of Ayin Beis in general. So we have some, we have more material to cover. Okay, so that covers what we learned till yesterday. Any questions? And if there aren't any questions, I'm going to continue, but I'm going to give an introduction to the next piece before we read it inside. Okay. So I'm going to sum up something I said yesterday, but I want to emphasize it again right now. And based on how the Mittler Rebbe explains it, what we have is that the mitzvahs themselves is the shemen, the physical objects from which the mitzvahs are made of is the oil. The psila is the human being or the divine soul that does the mitzvah, that draws that oil and turns it into the divine fire, the divine light, the candle. Now, you have two things here. There's the transformation of the physical objects, the shemen, there's transformation of the animal soul. So, if you go based on what we're discussing now, you could say Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam is talking about how the divine soul impacts the animal soul and turns it into oil, or turns the oil, the intelligence of the animal soul, into fuel that fuels the love of God. And that's through the contemplation of Shema and the Yichud and the unity between the divine and existence that we learned at length in Ayin Beis as well. Ner Mitzvah is coming to talk about how we transform the physical world and not so much about the animal soul. But the truth is, even though the Mittler Rebbe did not say it right here, in Torah from the Alter Rebbe, his main emphasis is actually how a mitzvah helps us transform the animal soul. So which one is it? The answer is both. And in Ayin Beis, indeed, he actually says both explicitly. You go back to page 1352. In 1352, he says it explicitly, bottom of 1351. I'm just going there right now. So in 1351, he says like this. What's Ner Mitzvah? He says the psila is the mitzvahs, the ratzon elyon, that manifests in Dvarim Gashmi, in the physical objects. That's like he explains it here in the Mitzvah Rebbe, like tefillin and tzitzis he brings. So it's the revelation of the divine will in these physical things, and that elevates these physical objects. He says clearly from Tanya chapter 23 that the chayis of the Maisa mitzvahs, the vitality of the performance of mitzvahs, who bottle legami legaber atzanotznel hamalubish bay. So the physical object becomes like a goof to the neshama. That's what he says, like a body to the soul. And it also becomes a keli alavush to the divine soul. And that's why all the every agufa odam, all the limbs of the human body, nasa merkava mamish. That's what it says in Tanya. So I'm quoting from the bottom of page 1351 in Ayin Beis. They all become like a chariot, like a vehicle for the divine. And he says, that's the idea of with the right arm, he embraces me. Yamin mekareves, like we learned. The gili milmaila shemaisa mitzvah as a mekad of kol advarim gashmi. The gili milmaila of maisa mitzvahs of performance of mitzvahs is mekarev. Like when you hug somebody, you embrace them, you bring them closer. All the objects, physical objects from tachas, memshalas, klipas, nega are all encompassed through the mitzvah into godliness, as we learned. Then he says, the gam yesh ba mitzvah, and then there's another thing in the mitzvah. Zgula pratis, a particular feature and strength, lahalis is a nefesh abamis, to elevate the animal soul, to bind it to Ein Sof. So you see both elements here. That's one thing. Now, before we continue, I want to bring up another key introduction here. When you say the pasuk Ner Mitzvah v'Torah, so what's pasuk pshat in that pasuk? Candle, it says the candle is a mitzvah, and the Torah is light. So you can interpret it on a very basic level that the mitzvah is not the light. The mitzvah is the ner, is the candle, and the light it produces, that's Torah. The ner mitzvah, the mitzvah is a ner. What does the ner consist of? Oil, a wick, and when you light it, when the person who does the mitzvah lights it, then you have a Torah. That's one way to explain the verse. And he's going to bring this interpretation. But there's another interpretation that Ner Mitzvah itself produces light. That the Ner Mitzvah is also a form of light. Because a Ner, even before you get to Torah, the Ner itself is the wick, using the oil, and it produces a candle, the light of the candle. Then the pasuk says, "V'Torah," and Torah is even a higher level of light. So this is going to be now addressed in the next section in the Mitzvah Rebbe's Maimer, and I'll point out how the Rebbe Rashab explains it on page 1352, and also based on the Alter Rebbe's Maimer in Torah, where he also discusses it. So these points are very vital in understanding exactly how the verse. So the first point I made was we're talking about the material of this world and the animal soul, two aspects that the mitzvahs elevate, and or you could say one. It embraces maybe the hamshacha but also the hamshacha and also elevate. So it's both, and the animal soul. And the second point is, where's the light? Is it the light of the candle or the light of the Torah? And we'll learn that there's both levels. I just want to see a moment what it says in Torah. Just trying to connect all the pieces here. Let me see. Yeah, here he says the mitzvah is the another thing I should mention. The Psila Mitla Rebbe said the wick is the nefesh halikis, is the person who does the mitzvah or the divine soul. In Torah and I believe also in Samach Vav, he says another way. He says the wick is the mitzvah itself. The fact that a mitzvah is a physical experience is like a wick that's drawing down the Ratzon Elyon. He actually says those words. So it's like there's several different interpretations here. They're all consistent. There's no contradictions. But when you look at it, let me see. Apsilihi mitzvah. That's what he says in some Ayin Beis. And the same thing here in Torah. He says at the bottom of page 39D, he says clearly, Apsilihi mitzvah. Doesn't say the psila is the divine soul. So you have to say that both interpretations are fine. It's just a question what you're emphasizing. It says clearly, a mitzvah here, a mitzvah he gamkin. Ner hainu apsila. Mitzvah is apsila. 1 second. That could be that when he's talking about the interpretation that it's elevating the animal soul, so then the psila is the mitzvah. When it's talking the interpretation of elevating the world, then the psila is the person that's doing it. That may be pshat. I'm not positive about that. Second. Okay. So let's learn inside now, and we'll see how he explains Ner Mitzvah and Torah. We're still speaking about the focuses on the mitzvahs here. So we're middle of page 401 in Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. The pages can be found at ayimbeis.com. V'zehu Ner Mitzvah, and this is the meaning of Ner Mitzvah. Sha Mitzvah nikra Ner B'chlal. That the mitzvah is called in general a ner, a candle. Sha Yidei Zeh was through the mitzvah, as we learned, Yechibur v'kesher l'amshachas she'er ha'eliki ha'pnimis dekedush ha'elyon lamata be'elam ha'gashmi. Because through a mitzvah, what do? You're connecting. You're joining and binding the transmission of the Eir Eliki, of the primis of Kedesh Elam, the Ratzon Elyon of the Eibishter. This is the higher Kedusha of the Eibishter. And what are you binding it with? Lamata, you're drawing it into Lamata Be'elam HaGashmi, in the physical world. Like we said, when you take tzitzis, or tefillin, or any other mitzvah, or maisis, trumas and maisis, carbonis, all the examples he gave before. Shefer, lulav, esrig, vesukah, zdaka, carbon, all these examples. You're taking and making a chibur, and that's the Ner Mitzvah, because the Ner Mitzvah is making a keli of the oil of the physical world and turning it into a keli for what? For the Kedesh Elyon of Alakus, of godliness. V'gam Neshama nikra Ner Hashem, like we learned earlier. Also, Neshama is called Ner Hashem, a candle of Hashem. Why? Liya shehi b'chinas mamutza lechabra er b'keli kanal. So now he's bringing these two psukim together. Not only, like we learned before, that it's to elevate the animal soul. It's because the neshama is the mamutza that connects the eir and the keli. To take the mitzvah, which is in the keli, and turn it into an eir aliki, you need the person to do the mitzvah. You need the neshama. So ner mitzvah v'teira eir cannot really bring create oir unless you have the Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, the person who's going to perform the mitzvah. That's what he says in these few lines. And I brought these two together in context of what he said before, that's what he called the wick. The wick is what brings them together. So the wick refers to the Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, the candle of the Neshama that brings together the physical world and the Elokus, that a mitzvah, through the performance of a mitzvah. So you have three things. The Eir Eliki, the divine energy. You have the mitzvah that is being done with the physical world, and you have the person who's doing it. Ulefizeh, and according to this, hari b'mitzvah shenikra neir ha'ikir hu Hashemen. So according to this way of interpreting it, the mitzvahs that are called Ner Mitzvah, candle, what is the primary, what is its primary aspect, the mitzvah itself? Not the person and not the oir it creates. Is the shemen shebechochmeh, shemen, is the oil. Because the oil, if you remember, is the physical world that is becoming fuel for godliness. That's what a mitzvah does. Why is that? Because shemen is the level of chochmeh. Shebechochmeh is bariru, and it's with chochmeh. Chochmeh creates the birur. Remember we said it's the birurim, the separation, the clarification, and refinement of the physical world. What creates birur? Chochmeh. Chochmeh shemen. But dvarim gashmim, it creates the birur, the refinement of the dvarim gashmim, the physical things. Liyas keli lemitzvah canal. In order to turn these gashmistic things into a keli for a mitzvah, like wool for tzitzis, cloth, parchment for tefillin. So based on this, the main thing that a mitzvah is the shemen. It's the person that creates the wick that does the mitzvah. That's what it is. The Torah, and what about the light itself, the divine light? Based on this, mitzvah is primarily the shemen. It's providing the fuel. But the actual light, the revelation, the Torah hu ha'oir, and the Torah is the oir. So based on this, Ner Mitzvah is primarily the Ner, the shemen. And the oil that it produces, the light it produces, that's what Torah is. The aim Mitvzah, according to this explanation, Raka Adam she'esa mitzvah b'kavana canal, and the interface, the Mitvzah is not the mitzvah. The Mitvzah is only the person who does the mitzvah, that performs the mitzvah with intention canal. So the mitzvah itself is taking the physical thing and preparing it and ready. When a person does a mitzvah, the divine light that it creates is the divine light of Torah. So that's how he interprets the pasuk. Ner Mitzvah v'Torah. So Ner Mitzvah is the primarily the shemen. The person, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, like the psila, the wick, is the Mitvzah that connects the shemen, the mitzvah in the physical world, with the performance, through the performance of it. And the light it produces, he's calling now Torah. The Torah is the Eir. V'im kain. And if so, Hainu inyan masha neshama nikra ner havaya. The inyan that the neshama is called Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, Ner Havaya, Nishmas Adam, Ner Havaya, al yidei Torah mitzvahs. V'im kain hainu inyan. I should read a different tone. V'im kain hainu inyan. So based on this is the inyan. What the Neshama is called Ner Havaya, Neshama is called the flame of God or the candle of God, al yidei Torah mitzvahs. That is actualized through Torah mitzvahs. Shashemen heina mitzvahs. The shemen is the mitzvahs that you're actually doing, which manifests in the physical world. The Torah she'esik ba, and the Torah that he's immersed in, that he studies, that he is busy with. Hu ha'oir is the oir. The oir that it produces, v'hu atzmei ha'mechaber, and the neshama itself is the mechaber between both of them. That's the one that connects the oir and the light and the shemen. That's the person. So that's one way of interpreting the pasuk. Ach, I mean, I can stop here for a question, but let me read the other interpretation. Ach, says the Mittler Rebbe, mashma, ach be'emes, in truth, when you read the pasuk properly, he says, in truth, it's mashma, it appears that the interpretation is not the way we just said. Shah mitzvahs nikra ner, because the mitzvahs nikra ner. When you say the mitzvah is called a ner, it's not just one aspect of the ner, the oil. When you say ner, it means all three. Because we know a candle consists of oil, a wick, and the light that it produces. So mashma da mitzvah nikra ner, v'yesh b'zeh gimel dvarim. And in the mitzvah, there's the three things. Based on the first explanation we just said, the mitzvah is only the shemen part. The oil is from Torah, and the wick is the mechaber, is from the Neshama, the Ner Mitzvah that does the mitzvah. But it's mashma be'emes. Be'emes is mashma that there's three things in Ner Mitzvah. Shu hashemen va'apsila va'oil. There's the oil, the wick, and the light. And separately, the Gama Neshama, and also the Neshama has separately, Nikra Ner is also called a candle. Begimul Dvarim Elu. It also has three things. Shemen, Upsila, Va'ir. Two separate things, two separate candles, so to speak. Based on the explanation he first gave, it sounds like it's all one thing. The Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom is like the wick, that part that connects. The mitzvah part is the oil, and the Torah is the oil. But the be'emes, it's mashma, that's two separate psukim, two separate things. Ner mitzvah, the mitzvah has all three, and the neshama has all three. Ubezin yonim ucholokim hem. And they're two separate matters. Obviously, they come together because a person does a mitzvah. But the pasuk is not saying that both psukim come together and there are three total. There are actually two different sets of three. There's the mitzvah has the three, and the neshama has the three. And yet, even though they're separate entities, so to speak, they come together, they unite. When a person performs a mitzvahs, the mitzvahs, then you come together. The Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom with its three elements of wick, oil, and light comes together with the three elements of the mitzvah, the Ner Mitzvah. That's what he says is be'emes mashma from the psukim here. He's going to explain what this means. But you see how he's dissecting the pasuk very interestingly, that you can really interpret both ways. And he began with a so-called initial interpretation. Then he says, the word is be'emes mashma. I should add, but by performing the other mitzvahs, v'teira benafshe. So let me see how to read. V'kima other mitzvahs, v'teira benafshe nikra b'chinas ner havaya. He's adding teira in his nefesh, and the person's nefesh is called Ner Hashem. Ner havaya nishma sodom. Not sure what he's adding with. Not sure. Hold on. 1 second. Not sure what he's adding with that, because he did say there's two sets. And then what's the v'teira B'nafshe nikra b'chinas ner havaya. I'll leave it for now because I want to see how he explains this further, and maybe it'll be better understood. So in other words, because in the pasuk Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom, there's no reference made to the Torah. In Ner Mitzvah Torah, you have Ner Mitzvah has all three, including the light that comes from the candle. Then you have a Torah, there's a higher level of light. Could be he's saying that the Torah, the in Torah, in the Nefesh, is called Ner Hashem. That's why it's Ner Hashem. So it's a light of God, a candle of God. That may be the Torah, but I have to understand exactly what he's trying to. I would wait before we really fully interpret that, because it's a little not so clear to me, at least. Okay. Yeah, I think it's going to be understood as we read on. So that line, just we'll leave that. We'll get to that. Are there any questions about?
Yeah, I I have something.
One second.
I'm sorry.
Are there any questions about these two interpretations that we just learned? Because it's not finished yet. There's still a good number of lines to read in this paragraph to fully explain it. So there's still has to be a finished, but I'll stop just in case anybody wants to clarify anything.
So Rabbi Jacobson, here's what I was going to say. One thing that to me, when it comes to reconcile the two and kind of mesh the two together, the mitzvah pru or urvu is a mitzvah. So which means the creation of the neshamot themselves is a byproduct of that very mitzvah. So that's why the neshama is also it's part. In other words, it is a byproduct of the mitzvah. So that's how you can reconcile the two together. No,
I don't do any processing when I learn. I don't know. I don't need to reconcile them. It's perfectly fine as it is.
But pru and urvu is you give me that, right? Pru and urvu is a mitzvah, not just putting on tefillin. Creating another neshama is a mitzvah. So that neshama that's created is also a mitzvah, not just the physical. Like, you see what I'm saying?
Well, we could say you don't create a soul; you create the body. God gives the soul. The Talmud says. So as soon as you bring other things, it throws me because he's not talking about it. You want to. I don't know if this reconciliation works, to be honest.
Okay.
Are there any questions about what we've just learned? Okay. Good. V'zeu shamar, v'zeu sha'imrim, shekedishanu b'mitzvesov, that he sanctified us with his mitzvahs. When we say in the bracha, what does this mean now? Once he brings these two psukim, these two verses together, shekedishanu l'neshamas b'kedesh ha'elyon b'mitzvesov ha'elyenis. He's explaining that he sanctified us. He sanctified the souls with what? The souls themselves have a certain sanctity. Shamash and Asata B'Teiri. But he sanctified us with the Kedesh sanctity of Kedesh Elyon of Kedushas Asmus b'mitzvesov ha'elyenis. With his supernal, with his higher, the mitzvahs above, lies, in a manner, shegam haneshamas nikra b'chinas ner havaya mamish. Notice what he's doing here is saying, the pasuk Ner Mitzvah v'Terer, that the mitzvahs which are from Kedesh Elyon, that's what gives that the neshamas themselves should also be called Ner. Just like a mitzvah is called Ner, because it manifests the Keli and all the three things he said of Kedesh Elyon. So Kedeshana b'mitzvah, the Ner mitzvah sanctifies us with Kedesh Elyon. Shagam neshamas nikb'chinas Ner havaya mamish, not Ner Elikim, Ner havaya mamish. Kamoya mitzvah shenikrai mitzvah savaya. Just like the mitzvahs are called mitzvah savaya. In other words, the neshama itself is a divine soul, but then it comes down and doesn't necessarily have in a revealed way, because it becomes like Yotzu v'nifradut, like he says in Ageres HaKedesh. I should have brought that earlier. Neshama comes down like Elikusha Nasa Nivra. It's come down as a separate entity, like a child born from a father. Yes, he comes from the very genetic material and the genetic matter of his father's mind, as he explains in Tanya, but he's now a dependent entity. A child is a child. He's not an extension of his father. So he has that. But to make him a ner havaya, like mitzvah havaya, that are still connected, like a mitzvah that is God's commands, God's ratzon, the mitzvahs, the mitzvahs transfer that higher level of kedusha to the neshama and reveal in the neshama that connection. So the neshama is also called ner havaya, like mitzvahs havaya. That's what he's saying right here. So notice the ner havaya is coming through the mitzvahs. That's his interpretation. And maybe that's what it means that Terer benafshe and ikar b'chinas ner havaya. So we'll have to figure that out. Okay. V'hu al yedei mitzvahs dafka, and this happens dafka through mitzvahs. essentially he's saying that you wouldn't have the Ner Havaya, that Gili of Havaya in the Nishmas Adam without the mitzvahs. Even though you could say, 1 second, the Pasuk says it without any conditions. The Pasuk says Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. But to really appreciate that Ner Havaya, obviously a Neshama comes from Havaya, but Havaya Mamish in the fullest sense of the word, like Mitzvahs Havaya, that comes through the Mitzvahs Dafka. That's what he says here. And how is that actualized? How does the mitzvah do it? He says, "V'zehu dafka de kabbalas el malchus shamayim sheyesh b'chol mitzvah." So a neshama is now performing a mitzvah. How does it do it? Through kabbalas el malchus. It accepts the yoke of heaven. That's what a mitzvah is. I am accepting and I'm following your orders. Every mitzvah, sha'amar b'naseh etzeinei. When we say sha'amar b'naseh etzeinei, we're fulfilling the Ratzon Hashem. Shenikra el mitzvahs. That's called the yoke of mitzvahs, meaning it's a responsibility. It's an effort. B'bitl haratzon. When you say oil, means I'm accepting. It doesn't come easy. It means I'm accepting the yoke. It's like carrying the weight of God's Ratzon upon us. The person is nullifying their own desire. Like we say, instead of following your own will, you're following God's will. To do the will of the master, of the Kene, of the Eibishter. So that Kabbalah Sel Machshus Hamayim, that a person accepts the mitzvah, so the neshama is now is drawing the mitzvahs havaya, the kedush ha'elyon of mitzvahs into the neshama, making it into a ner havaya mamish nishmas adam. Shezeu b'chinas hamamutza lahamshich b'chinas. You know what? Let me stop for a minute. One second. Let me not jump. Let's go a little slowly here. So let me stop again if anybody wants to ask anything. Before I read the next line, I see it's already going further. Any questions? No questions? So then let's continue. 1 second. Okay. So far so good. Okay, that's what that is. Shezeu b'chinas hamamutza lahamshich es b'chinas sa'ir. Remember, he's been talking about the neshamas serving as the mamutza between the mitzvah and the oir that it creates, because a mitzvah is not a mitzvah until you perform the mitzvah. So mitzvah is, you have tefillin, you have tzitzis, but you have to now perform the mitzvah and say Asher Kedushan Mitzvah V'Tzivanu. The mamutza, the hamshich is b'chinas sa'ir. To draw down the level of oir is the mamutza. K'maya neshama shenikra mamutza, like the soul that's called the interface, the intermediary, lahavi, hevi, u'lechaber eira leki lamata canal, to bring and to draw and to connect the divine light lamata. That's the neshama that serves as the mamutza, that essentially lights the candle to produce light. But who? He explains, Lefisha Kabbalah Sel Mitzvahs, the parentheses, because Kabbalah Sel Mitzvahs, the idea of accepting the yoke of mitzvahs. Sharshe, next page, 402. Lamayla Megufa Er is higher than the root, than the guf, than the very body of the Er itself. He said this earlier as well. And I explained it briefly, but I think I should explain it more at length. If you look on the previous page, 400, it says Schar Mitzvah Mitzvah Atzmeh Shoakeli Shalamai Legamin Atzmeh. So in Mittler Rebbe, I don't recall the Mittler Rebbe elaborating earlier on this, but in Ayin Beis was a long arichas on this topic. That even though the Oyer in Giluyim, in Revelation, the Oyer is obviously higher than the Keli. And the Keli is a Keli to the Oyer. But the very creation of a Keli, like the creation of a body, has a root that's higher than the Oyer. It comes from, like we learned, Helam Atzmi. It comes from God's power to conceal, which is higher than God's power to reveal. So today, a neshama is higher than the body. The oyer is higher than a keli. The osid level, we say neshama nezunis min aguf, the soul will be nurtured, will be nourished from the body, because the guf is rooted in the reshimu, which is rooted higher than the oyer of the kav, like we learned in Ayin Beis at length, relatively a lot earlier. So now he's bringing this into the picture in the parentheses, similar to what he said earlier. So, now, being that mitzvahs, like he said in Ayin Beis as well, is connected to the kelim, it creates the keli. Remember, that's why it's called ner. It creates the keli. It's the oil. It's the oil that it turns matter of this world into oil that fuels godliness, the oil. So in that sense, even though the neshama is the one that's the mamutza to perform a mitzvah, but it's the keli that adds something, and that's what he's saying here. So how is the mitzvah add something to the neshama? Because the neshama is like the neshama is creating the oil, and the mitzvah Kabbalah says the ma'ila megufa oil, and that's why it elevates. Like we learned earlier, that the oil adds light and fire to the neshama too. Continuing on page 402, the Ratzon v'Chochmeh, just want to get all the parentheses now, the end of the bracket. So ignore the bracket. We're still in the middle of a parentheses. So he says like this. The Ratzon v'Chochmeh shebe mitzvah. Second, the Ratzon v'Chochmeh shebe mitzvah of the desire and the wisdom in the mitzvah appears that's higher than the guf, than the oir shebe mitzvah. K'mesher kosev hikim el shalteru mitzvahs. To establish the oil, the authority, the yoke of Eila Shaltera mitzvahs, Yitzechens and Shmuel Beis. I have to look it up, how it's explained. Why is this? Okay, so we see from this that mitzvahs have the element of oil. Mishum the Seif Maise, Kabbalah Sel Sham mitzvahs. Eila Lamaila Meguf Etzem Arotzen V'Atainik Shebe mitzvahs. Let me read this again. 1 second. The It sounds like he's saying that there's the etzem mitzvah, what God wants, and accepting the yoke of that. The elol l'mayla meguf etzem harotzim v'ataynik shebe mitzvahs k'meshkosim b'malkamacher v'dal. He's adding another point here, which he did not make till now. Before he was saying that the keli has an element that's higher than the earth. Now he's saying the Kabbalah sale that when we accept Torah mitzvahs, meaning we accept the yoke and the authority and of Torah mitzvahs, that is higher, he says, than the very rotzen and tainug of the mitzvahs themselves. It sounds to me similar to what he said earlier. The mitzvah has kedusha. The very fact that there's tefillin or tzitzis, that it has an element. God made, like we learned earlier on top of previous page. He says, "Yes, but tefillin gedusha gam kisheina manicha." There's gedusha in the mitzvah in the object even before you do it. But the person doing the mitzvah is critical to be mamshir l'hamshach of a mitzvah. You need to perform the mitzvah. You need kavana, and I think he's adding now. You need kabbalah sale, and that kabbalah sale is higher than the very ratzon and timing of the mitzvah itself. So even though God has a ratzon and timing that's manifest in, let's say, tefillin or the other mitzvahs, but the kabbalah sale of the neshama that accepts the mitzvah reaches even deeper, which is why you need the person to do the mitzvah. That's what it sounds like to me. I'm not positive, to be very honest. I want to look up the sources down below, but that's what it sounds like that this parenthesis came to add. Yeah, not 100%. I need to review this again and again to really get it right. I'm going to think it through some more. Any questions or comments? Someone wants to weigh in on this? I'm happy to hear your thoughts on it. That's what it sounds like to me. To read it again. Mitzvahs dafka. Mitzvahs dafka create the ner havaya. Now, one more point that I think is critical here. A neshama on its own, he was saying without mitzvahs, doesn't seem to have this higher level. But when a neshama makes an effort to accept the mitzvahs of Hashem, that creates something that the neshama itself does not have. And that's only possible with Kabbalah sale. I think that's also a key point. That's, I think, the main point. I said before that there's the mitzvah and then there's the Kabbalah sale. That's correct. But there's another aspect, the Kabbalah sale of doing a mitzvah, meaning the effort that a person makes in performing a mitzvah down below reaches a higher place than the actual performance of the mitzvah itself. I'm reading again. Yeah. Now it reminds me in Simchas Torah Tofresh Ayin Beis in Torah Shalom, the Rebbe Rashab says, he talks there why neshama comes down below. So he says in some places it says for birurim, to refine the world, but some places it says for the neshama. That only down below is what he calls hefsed hatsura. The neshama loses its entire identity. In Gan Eden and Lamayla, the neshama doesn't lose its identity. It's very much, its spiritual identity is very intact. It's in this world where neshama is thrown into a very dark world. And it has to work hard to find itself, like it's lost. It's sent away from the palace of the king. That Kabbalah sale reaches the highest levels all the way into Atzmos. I'm thinking this is what he's trying to say here, that the neshama that comes down below, when it works hard to accept mitzvahs, that is what gives it the kedusha of the mitzvah, which is even higher than the mitzvah itself, because it's the Kabbalah, the effort that the neshama makes. It sounds similar when I read it to that idea. I'm not 100% positive, but that's what I think he's saying. Interesting topic that needs a lot of a little more analysis. I want to see. I'm sorry. I can. Safe Maisa b'Kabbalah sale, because he says the safe Maisa of Kabbalah sale, meaning Kabbalah sale down below. Safe Maisa, that's where you need Kabbalah sale. And a Neshama L'mayla doesn't need Kabbalah sale. It's Dafka here where it breaks itself. Also some mitzvahs. Eila L'mayla meduf etzem aratz ma'atayne sheva mitzvahs.
Can I ask a question or make a comment, Rabbi Jacobson?
Yeah, sure.
I just heard this story, and I don't know the name of the rabbi. You may actually know the story better than I do. That there was a rabbi that was denied matzah and he was denied food altogether, and he didn't eat anything for the whole entire Pesach because he didn't want to eat chametz. Afterwards, he gets a hold of matzah somehow, and then he holds this piece of matzah for a whole year. before, and he guards it before he's able to do it, the mitzvah again. I think this is a perfect example of that. That okay, everybody can eat matzah on Pesach, but this guy went to hold this piece of matzah the whole year, guarded it, so he can be able to perform the mitzvah. I think this Kabbalah, all that you're talking about, I mean, this example explains that perfectly.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the story, but I hear.
I'll find the details and the name of the rabbi and everything, and I'll retell it to you. But it's an amazing thing that this guy held this piece of matzah the whole year to be able to do it, just this one mitzvah.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you. Any other questions? Anybody want to ask anything else? Yeah. Okay. So to sum up what we've learned so far is he's bringing together both verses. First, he said Ner Mitzvah, that the primary thing of the mitzvah is the candle part, which is the oil, taking the physical world and turning it into a fuel. But the wick is the Neshama Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom, and Torah hu ha'er, and the Torah is the air that it produces, the divine light, and the Mitvzah is the Adam that does the mitzvah. So based on that, Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom means that through that, like Sim can handle any mashal Neshama Niknever, they tell the mitzvah Hashem and in mitzvahs. Yeah, that through doing Torah mitzvahs, the Neshama is a Ner Havaya. And he's the one that connects the Torah and the oil of the Torah and the mitzvahs, the oil of the mitzvahs. But the emes mashma, in truth, it appears that's not all that. It's not three. It's two separate sets of threes. Ner mitzvah is a separate thing that has three elements: oil, wick, and light. And also the neshama is a candle that has all three: oil, wick, and light. They're two separate things. And then they join together as one when a person performs mitzvahs. And then he explained how does it work when they come together. Why is it called Ner Havaya, Nishmas Adam? Because when a person does a mitzvah, the Ner of the mitzvah ignites, so to speak, the Ner of the Neshama and turns to Ner Havaya because Kedishana b'mitzvah, just like the mitzvahs are Havaya from the highest level, and Neshama is now of Havaya. And that's achieved through a Neshama doing the mitzvah, especially Kabbalah Shel Malchus Shamayim, the yoke, that effort, which reaches deeper than the very mitzvah itself. That's what it appears, what we've learned so far, summing up what we've learned. We'll have to figure out what is V'Torah here. And that's what he's going to come to explain now. But I think I'll stop here just to absorb this, and tomorrow we'll continue the next section. Because he did say Torah b'nafsh b'chnis ner avaya. So we're on the third line of page 402. We start with be'emes sheirashin and gimel dvarim alalu is to the mamutza of Torah. Okay. He's going to speak about Torah, but we have two levels in Torah. There's Torah and there's Torah the Torah that it adds into the mitzvahs. But that we'll learn tomorrow. So I'm going to stop here on the top of page 402. That's a summation of what we learned today. Are there any other questions? We're good? Okay. Okay.